Okay, so over the span of the last month, feels like at least the last month, we've had a lot of online discussions surrounding Todd Phillips' new movie Joker, a movie that just opened today, had its premiere showings last night or preview showings last night here in the States. People around the world have been watching it for the last couple days, and no acts of violence have broken out at all in any theater, regardless of how much some people you can tell in the access media are absolutely salivating for it to happen. And if that comes across as hyperbolic or mean spirited, I'm not sorry, because I have watched their chatter for the last month, watched them demean and deface a film that the vast majority of the world hasn't seen yet, all under the perceived idea, the theory, the opinion that something terrible could happen because of Aurora 8 or 7 years ago, when Aurora had nothing to do with the Joker character or with Batman or with any of it at all, period. This information is out there, but for some reason, they keep using it as a scapegoat, and I can't quite figure out why. The movie, which I just saw last night, was quite good, although I don't know if I personally liked it, and I want to talk about that a little bit. This is an honest conversation about the politics, though, of the film, because this has been weighing on my mind since going into the theater last night, where I was sitting in the theater last night, and then who I had a conversation with after the fact last night, and everything else. So, you know what? As much as I was pushing back against the concept of somebody walking in with a gun and shooting up the theater I was sitting in, that idea did somewhat cross my mind as I was going to the cinema. My movie, my theater had it playing in about, I think it was 16 screens all throughout the night. Warner Brothers had got them a major block, and the rhetoric from the online media had actually pushed a lot of people away. Across these 16 showings, they'd only sold 255 tickets, which is very low. I know one of the managers, and I was speaking with him about it after the fact. But during the movie, which did make me feel uneasy and unnerved and very conflicted throughout the vast majority of it, there was the moment where I kind of had that, I'm like, oh, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I like to sit in the front row. I could be, or I don't know, what happened sort of thing. Thankfully, nothing happened. But the fact that that was even on my mind in a screening like this, when I knew nothing was going to happen, but I still had that, there's always that what if, and I've worked in movie theaters long enough to know that it would never actually happen, but you never really honestly know. And I'm glad that it didn't. I'm glad there's no acts of violence or anything else like that. But the what I'm trying to get through here is that thought process, that even though I knew nothing was going to happen, was still somewhat in the back of my mind, because there's always that potential. There's always that potential. We hear about it all the time. And you don't quite know necessarily if it's going to happen to you. And that is one of the things that I think is keeping people away from a lot of these public places a lot of times, is the fact that they become massive targets. And so they just sit at home with their 75-inch 4K UHD TV and they just watch Netflix, because at least home is safe. And that's all this is about, the perception of safe. That's at least my thoughts about the politics surrounding the movie. Let's talk about the politics of the film itself. So, the movie does not glorify Arthur Fleck becoming the Joker. It teeters on the edge of it, and it does that for a reason, because it wants you to sympathize with him to a point. The journey that Arthur goes on is one of absolute failure. And what I mean by that is the failure that the system has on him. Everything in his life has failed him. Everything. His family, his job, his friends, the system, the state, everything. It constantly, routinely fails him. And through the course of his life, he has done everything he could to put a smile on his face, to keep a smile going, to put the perception out there that he's fine, that he's okay, that it's okay, that things are going to be okay. All the meanwhile, he is breaking down internally, because all of these things in his life failed him and pushed him towards this act. And they do make you sympathize with the character of Arthur Fleck up until a point. And that's because when he becomes aware of what he is, of what he is becoming, he leans into it. And that ultimately then turns whatever sympathy you might have had into disgust, into disdain, into no. And it's done like that in order to make you think about your own life and the people around you. Violence isn't at the center of the Joker movie. The fact there's very little violence in the movie overall. There's a couple scenes here and there, but it's really nothing that you would call, I don't know if I'd call it gratuitous, but it's definitely there for a reason. And throughout this movie, when you watch him become violent, you almost sympathize with him the first time, right? He gets beaten up by those kids. In the beginning, we see it in the trailer. Then there's this guys on the subway train, and the subway train guys are beating him again, and he has the means to fight back, and he does. And he doesn't feel bad as a result of this, because for once in his life, he took power. Now, this has a lot to do with mental illness, and a lot of it to do with sustained mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and also dealing with a system that is currently running out of money, because the time frame of which this movie is set is a big part of that, right? It's set in Gotham in the 1980s. Gotham is currently having just a financial crisis. There is trash littering the streets. There are, super rats everywhere. Thomas Wayne, who is kind of like a Trumpian character, but through the portrayal that we see of him through Joker's eyes. Because keep in mind, we're looking at it through his lens. That's how he views him. Whether or not he is or isn't, we don't quite know. I don't think he is. He's not a bad person, even though he's perceived to be in the movie. But again, this is just the perspective of which we're seeing it, and everything else. So when everything fails Arthur, and he starts to manifest relationships and manifest certain things, and he starts to become more and more crazy, it really does show you how the system can let anyone slip through the cracks and what could potentially happen. This isn't a story about an incel. In fact, incels have very little to do with it. Involuntarily celibate people have nothing to do with this type of story. These are the type of people that feel like they can't get a girl, so they become, radicalized, and they become crazy over it, and then they think everything's entitled and that they should just, they should take it. Now, some might argue, but isn't that the same factor involved with a life of crime or what the Joker does? He just wants to take. Yeah, but he's not taking it for any kind of specific reason. At the end of the movie, when he's asked, "Are you political?" he says, "No, I'm not political. I don't stand for anything." And that's the whole point. He doesn't. He is chaos incarnate, and he's a match in a tinderbox for how bad Gotham is at that point in time. I looked at it more or less like the French Revolution, right? Where someone like Bruce or Thomas Wayne was more like Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake." And then, of course, everything happened as a result after that. It was the poor eating the rich because they felt that they had been stepped on for too long. That is another aspect of this particular film. Nothing to do with involuntarily celibate people who can't get laid, who find themselves on the internet looking for other people who can't get laid, and then talking about those issues while getting more and more enraged over it. This has nothing to do with any of that. This is about mental illness. This is about the fact that we need more kindness in the world. And there's a line in the movie that I thought was great. When there's a scene, and it's this really intense scene, where there's a Joker, he had just taken somebody out. And there's another guy there that he knows. And that dude thinks he's going to die. Everyone in the audience thinks he's going to die. Everyone thinks this dude is going to get got. And then there's this kind of jump scare moment, and there's this other thing, and you're kind of like, ha, 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 you're laughing, but it's really unnerving, right? And that's where it gets you. And then he just says, "You were always nice to me. You may go." Now, that was a very significant and powerful line, because the guy you thought was a monster, who's being portrayed as a monster, has feelings, has empathy, showing us exactly where it is. Everyone had always crapped on Arthur or treated him like crap. They'd always been terrible to him. And now the one person who really was actually kind to him is in a position where Arthur can hurt them. And he doesn't want to because he doesn't need to. And that, of course, is a big part of the character. Arthur wants to stop awful people. Now, that is more of the bad argument here than anything else. Because people think that it's like the incels. Really, it's more of the vigilanteism is what I'm concerned about. If anyone takes that mantle up, I don't think they're going to. But it does give us a perfect yin to Batman's yang. And that is another part of it too. At the at the end of the movie, when the finale happens and whatnot, like, I get why he did what he did. I still don't sympathize with him. I don't empathize with him. I'm disgusted by him by the end of the movie. But there's one saving grace. There's one saving grace. It's a quick shot at the very end that basically sets up Batman. And that way, I think they put that in there. They wrote that in there so that we know that justice will be served one day to him. Because at a movie, you want to walk out feeling like you either learned something or you got something or you had fun or something along those lines, right? This is not one of those movies where you're necessarily going to be thinking that. But having that shot at the end, knowing what's coming eventually, I think was cool. I thought that really kind of redeemed the movie in a little bit of a way for me. Not that the movie was bad. It was very well made. It was very well shot. It's very intense. You feel for Arthur all the way through until the moment you don't. And then by the end, you can understand why things happened, but you still don't feel sympathy for him. And that was what Todd Phillips was trying to say. But it's everything around him that failed him is what brought him to that point of being on the stage with Robert De Niro for the finale. That is why things happened the way that they did, because the system failed him long enough. And that, my friend, should be the grander fear here, is our system fails people constantly. We don't look at mental health. We don't look at it at all in our society for being anything that should be actively tried to be quelled, to be quashed, to be stopped. We never look at any of that. But we look at violence as the result of it, of our society failing people. And that is what this movie is about. You watch the movie and you go, oh, if someone was just nice to him, maybe this wouldn't have happened. All right. And I was talking with the guy after the movie. The guy sat next to me was a former parole officer of 32 years. Both him and I saw the movie. We were a seat apart from each other. We were both, by ourselves. Which, by the way, there's a whole thing going around about AMC blocking single patrons from going to see Joker. Not true. It's fake. Anyway, but we were talking about it, and we're both discussing mental health and how he goes, yeah, in many cases involving crime, it's all mental health related. A lot of it's mental health problems. And the system just forgets about them. Society forgets about them. We have 11 million homeless people. The vast majority have mental health issues. People today have more mental health issues than we can even possibly count. But the problem with it is that we just keep supplying them with distractions like the internet and anything else rather than actually acknowledging what it is that is wrong with them and getting them the help that they need. Mental health is stigmatized in our society. Psychiatrists are like $160 an hour. Right? Like my therapist is $160 an hour. That's insane. That my insurance covers it, thank God. But it's like, that's what she charges. That's another problem with our country. The scars that we don't see that amount and amount and amount and amount until they crack and fracture someone to the point of becoming Arthur Fleck. And when there was that line about you were always nice to me, I was immediately transported back to being a teenager in 1999 when Columbine happened. And hearing the story about how those two guys let people go who were nice to them. It reminds me of the line from Waiting from 2005 where Ryan Reynolds says, never fuck with somebody who handles your food. And I think that is a great line for everything. The movie Falling Down was about a man feeling pushed to the edge and him responding. This movie is very similar, but with a really poignant message about how we need to start paying attention. If any conversation comes from this movie, it has everything to do with trying to identify mental illness early, to get people in proper programs to address it, not dope them with medication. I don't really believe in that, but like if it's there sort of thing. And to destigmatize it and to say that it's okay to ask for help. And above all else, make it affordable. That was one of the biggest problems of the movie. The state ran out of money, so they kicked Arthur off of his therapy and off of his meds. The state failed him as much as his mother failed him, as much as his friends failed him, as much as society failed him. That's the politics of the movie. That's what Todd Phillips is trying to say. And that's why it's something that you should see. If anything, just to witness it for yourself in order to have those uneasy thoughts, to be conflicted, to be confused, to make sure that you're thinking about that. Because if it gets through to you, if it stays with you, if it resonates with you, then perhaps you can act when you see something. You see somebody having a bad day. You go over, tell them a joke, make them smile, say, hey, everything's going to be okay. Empathy, kindness goes a lot further than apathy and coldness. And that's exactly what this movie is about. As weird as that is to say, that is exactly what this movie is about. And I just want to put my thoughts out there for that one. I want to know your guys' thoughts on this, your guys' opinions. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys thought. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Did I miss something? Is there a point you want to make? I want to hear it. This movie is not about promoting violence or chaos or destruction. It's a movie about noticing a cry for help before it's too late and not letting people be failed by a system that is designed to ultimately protect them, and how we put money over people's health and safety and well-being. Just saying. Just saying.